before working as a software engineer, though, he's had exciting adventures in aerospace and biomedical and electrical engineering. Um, so I'll pass it off on to Alex whenever you're ready.
Hey guys. I guess, so how do we do this? Maybe I'll just say a few words or what my talk is about. So my talk is basically about two toy projects that I kind of made following some pain points that I encountered in day-to-day working, on microservices architectures with Clojure, Cube. And these kind of turn into, a little open source repos. So one is called EasyRPC. So it kind of aims to abstract away client and API code and let you basically call remote functions without the hassle of setting up your RPC framework or coding your APIs and clients and testing them. This is still a work in progress. This is kind of the first project I think I ever made in Clojure. So it's basically a proof of concept, but it would definitely require some work to make it truly production ready. The other one is called Redis Atom, and that so that basically implements the iAtom 2 interface to store your data on Redis, allowing you to basically, without any changes in your Clojure code, to put your atoms on Redis and thus share them between your Clojure microservices. And that stuff supports everything that Clojure does. So, reset, swap, obviously, I guess the most important one for Atom. Validation, notifiers, everything you can think of. And yeah, my talk basically talks through like a silly example of how you might use something like this. Basically go from your prototype project to something that can support a bit more users. Yeah, and that's it. I'm ready to take some questions if you have any.
Cool. So yeah, as before, feel free to throw on your questions either in the chat or the QA section, or raise hand. While we wait for people, I'm wondering, like, how does EasyRPC handle things like exceptions or timeouts from like remote function calls?
So timeouts doesn't actually handle. That's one of the issues with making it production ready. Whenever an error occurs on the let's say on the server side, you call some function remotely and it throws an error. EasyRPC basically serializes that exception object, and the client throws the same error.
Question just popped up.
Question in the chat and question in the Q&A. Okay, well, let's start with the chat. A question from Max. I'd like to know if you run into issues with EasyRPC being synchronous, and what if there are plans for hard RPC that uses queues? Sorry, you're asking whether I have plans to make a hard RPC that uses queues, or okay. Yeah, I mean that crossed my mind. It could definitely use queues. Well, the thing is, yeah, as I said, this is very much a proof of concept idea. We basically had at the point when I wrote this thing, we had like 4 microservices, you could call them that, and each of them had a HTTP API, like a REST API. Each of them had a client, and then we had to write tests for this. So I was like, okay, this is too much to maintain. But yeah, I can imagine using queues. Another, I guess, problem with it is that if you're trying to send a lot of data, it just uses NIPI, it serializes it and then sends it over. So you kind of have to serialize the entire thing before you can actually process it on the server side. So it's not for large objects. It's more for like quick message passing. It assumes your big data stuff is somewhere on is stored somewhere else. Does that answer the question? Okay. So let's go to the Q&A. Does EasyRPC support calling higher order functions? So I'm not sure what that means, calling higher order functions. Could you clarify that, Wesley?
If you want, we can also give you mic access, Wesley.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I mean, could you call things like map or reduce over EasyRPC, things that take a function as one of their inputs? Or return a function as one of their inputs accordingly?
So EasyRPC is simply, it invokes a remote function. So you can put it in a do-seek, I suppose, and run and let's say call a function for each element. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
For a more exact example, if I had some function that took another function as a filter for what it's going to return, can I pass a lambda through as one of the parameters in an EasyRPC call?
Oh, I see. So yes, I never actually tested it, but I think NIPI actually can serialize any object. So it should be possible. I don't know, actually. That's a good point.
Thanks.
Kind of a remote code execution type of thing.
Is there, so I figure based off what you were just saying, how it's very much a proof of concept. There's nothing like this yet, but is there like a plan to introduce something to handle like deployment of your EasyRPC servers? Like let's say you have a different version of the function that's going to be executed remotely and things are slightly changing. How would you handle that across like a distributed system with multiple servers?
So this is, yeah, this is more of a deployment problem. So you would handle it, I imagine you would handle it like you handle any sort of version change with your microservices. So obviously, if you don't want to break your entire system by changing some function, you would probably introduce another function or make your, the function you're calling to be backwards compatible. So it has the same problems as any other remote service or microservice. So it doesn't handle any of that.
Okay, makes sense.
There was another question in the Q&A. Question from Ray. Quick Google doesn't show the libraries. Are you planning to share the GitHub bucket? Oh, yeah, they're actually on my GitHub. You can go to sfertman /easy-rpc. It should be there. It's been open for a while.
Yeah, and someone just posted both of them in the talk channel on the Slack. Also a bit unrelated, but I really like the Borg in your talk.
Oh.
That's a good example. Good way to link it.
Thanks. Yeah, that was actually quite fun to sketch those stuff out. It was less fun trying to move it from my drawing pad over here. I don't know. You can see it. Anyway, it was a little bit of an issue to move it into the presentation, but really the drawing took like probably 20 minutes to do everything, but then trying to cram it into the presentation was hours of work. Engages, yeah, that's the word.
Oh, so we have a question in the chat, or yeah, in the chat from Dan, who says, "What's next for EasyRPC?"
What's next? Well, I suppose next would be, well, first of all, make it a little bit, probably rip out HTTP kit out of there and replace it with something more reasonable. I think HTTP kit had some problems with some of it. I don't remember, but I think it had some problem with WebSockets, or it's also a strictly Java library, if I remember correctly. So I wouldn't be able to use it in CLJS. I think that the stuff I wanted to do was introduce more ways of transporting data. So if it's over queues or over WebSockets or just raw TCP, introduce more ways of basically sending the data over the network. And another thing that is probably kind of a little bit less infrastructure-wise is, so right now, the way I create a client in EasyRPC, I just call a function, create a client, but then I have to go to each call site and tweak it a little bit. Recently, I kind of restarted working on it as I was preparing for the presentation. I kind of got all that stuff uploaded into my head. And the next thing I really want to tackle is to make it truly one line of code. So on the client side, I just want to def client and have it automatically overwrite your function calls into RPC calls without you having to go and change them one by one. So I kind of like how it turned out with Redis Atom, where I simply just implement a class, and then any sort of Atom code can become Redis Atom code without changing anything. And this is something I'd like to see happening for EasyRPC.
Just waiting in case there's anyone else typing. There's a discussion going on about how you might pass along, there's discussion in the Slack going along how you might pass along some of the stuff that Wesley was talking about.
Oh, let's see. So when are you thinking something like, oh, that was, oh, I see. I see, yeah. So well, that sort of thing is not really what it's for. So if you have a function in your, in your remote library that's called a map, and then it accepts a bunch of arguments, then yeah, this would work out of the box. But the idea is really just to abstract the function call to make it into RPC call. So I don't really want to complicate it. too much with that sort of stuff. Kind of leave it to the developer to decide how they want to actually handle it. Because if I had to deal with, those higher order functions like that, I would have to, go through the concurrency workshop again and, make something quite opinionated on, how I want to transfer that data, and does order matter? So I think that sort of stuff I kind of want to leave to the developer, and not try to make something that, might work for some, not work for others.
Makes sense. Have you, so you mentioned you work at TotaQ. Are you guys using either of those libraries at Tota?
No, actually not. We're using, well, for the microservices, as far as I know, we're still using API and client pairs. Every now and again, it kind of comes up. And for Redis Atom, we didn't actually have a use case for that. That just came up when at some point I was I needed to put some sort of a flag on Redis that would, prevent. So when we restart a service, we had to kind of prevent from the next service messing around with the state on Redis. So we had to make sure that the old one is shut down before the new one comes up. So that's when I kind of thought about it. But there's no kind of a clear use case for that so far. So yeah, these are very much personal projects.
I'm sure with time, a lot of these things tend to evolve like that, where you work on a personal project and it goes into production.
I mean, it's possible. I'd like to think that it's possible. But I mean, probably Redis Atom is more ready for stuff in production because it actually supports everything Clojure supports. EasyRPC is a little bit more work in progress, for sure.
One thing I think is cool with with both of them really, but especially with EasyRPC, is it kind of highlights how easy it is to like transmit just data through Clojure and then have that be evaluated as functions. Like I know there's always like all sorts of hoops you have to go through if you're trying to have like some sort of functional queue in other languages. So it's a really interesting use case.
Yeah, kind of my focus was just to, on the API and try to make it ergonomic. But yeah, it's pretty cool that Clojure just allows you to very easily, and especially really the stuff that made it almost like a weekend project was NIPI. But there's already a serialization library that could just take any Clojure object and make it into bytes, and then do the reverse thing on the other side. So I didn't have to do anything about that.
Right. And we got a message here where someone asked, Max asks, what are you using it for? EasyRPC, that is.
Oh, what I'm using it for? Well, nothing. I'm actually not using it for anything yet. I'm just developing it for fun, and I hope that it does become useful or interesting to somebody. Well, at first it was kind of like a pitch at my company, but it had well, it's not production ready, and then there were a bunch of other stuff that were it was lacking some features that were kind of convenient to have. So we didn't end up using it. But since then, for example, right now there's we have the I have the HTTP transport, so I can send stuff over HTTP, but I can also spin up a web server and then ping those functions from a browser if I want to. So I don't have to really, spin up a REPL or do anything. Like the stuff could be running, and if the port is open, if the web server is up, I can just ping a function and see what it does. So that was something that was missing at the time, but then I kind of added it later because it was actually a good idea.
Oh, in the chat, Max asks, have you considered extending it to a proper REPL?
Well, you could just open a REPL port, right? And then call any function you want. So I wasn't thinking about that. Yeah, I mean, possibly. I mean, but would there really be much kind of what will be the gain over just opening an nREPL port and connecting to your remote microservice?
Yeah, and Wesley just shared tools on nREPL for anyone that's interested in a quick way to get a REPL going on a remote service.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that you can tinker with your remote service like that.
Yeah, any more questions for Alexander while he's here? I don't see anyone typing. But yeah, thank you. I think these are two really cool libraries. I was quite impressed how easily you could switch over from at least from a basic monolith to a microservice type architecture with these. And I think that especially as the libraries develop, they'll become really useful for people in the community.
That's great. That's my hope, really. The example, I mean, it's fairly simple. I didn't want to, it's fairly simple, and it still took like 12 minutes to go through it. But yeah, what I wanted to kind of show is that you should probably spend most of your time, or as developers, we want to spend most of our time just iterating over a solution and not, gluing stuff together. So that's what I want to get rid of.
Yeah, it's a good endeavor, a difficult one for sure. Okay, well, thank you. I guess we can call it a bit early, and thanks so much for your time, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope you're enjoying the conference, and
I definitely do. Yeah.
Nice.
Definitely am. Enjoy.
Take care.